I want to begin by being careful about my own title, because I spent 2 weeks inside China's machine, and we underestimated everything contains a word that sounds like hyperbole. The word everything, and I want to be precise about the sense in which I mean it, because the imprecise reading is both false and alarmist, and I want neither. When I say we underestimated everything, I do not mean that China is an unstoppable machine and that the West is doomed, and I am not making that argument, because a machine, however impressive, has failure modes and dependencies and vulnerabilities, and China's carries real ones, and doom is not the conclusion. And I do not mean that our information about China was wrong, that we lacked the facts about its infrastructure or its manufacturing or its energy or its technology, because we had those facts in abundance. What I mean by we underestimated everything is something more precise and, I think, far more interesting, and it turns on the other key word in the title, the word machine. We underestimated not because we lacked information about the parts, but because we assessed each part in isolation and never saw the machine, the coordinated system, whose output exceeds the sum of its parts. And a component-by-component analysis systematically underestimates an integrated system. So the underestimation was, in a real sense, total. We underestimated everything. But it was a systems underestimation, a failure to see the coordination, not a gap in the information about the parts. That is the subject. Not that China is omnipotent, but that we assessed a machine as though it were a pile of parts, and thereby underestimated the whole even while getting the parts right. Let me be careful, as always, about the two extremes, because this subject pulls people hard toward one of them, and both are wrong. The first extreme is the alarmist narrative, the reading of Inside the Machine, and we underestimated everything as a story of an unstoppable Chinese juggernaut against which the West is helpless, and this is wrong, both because a machine has vulnerabilities, and China's are real, and because the alarm imports a helplessness that is as inaccurate as it is useless. And the second extreme is the comfortable dismissal, the insistence that we understand China perfectly well, that our assessments are adequate, that there is no underestimation, that the facts we have are the whole story. This is the more common error among sophisticated analysts, and it is more dangerous because it is precisely the confidence of the part-by-part assessment that misses the machine. The truth is neither an unstoppable juggernaut nor an adequately understood competitor. The truth is that we assessed an integrated system by examining its parts in isolation, that this systematically underestimates such systems, that the machine has genuine vulnerabilities and the West is itself a formidable machine, and that the interesting and useful thing is the analytical error, the systematic underestimation of systems by the decomposition of them into parts. So let me develop what a machine actually is, because the metaphor is precise and everything depends on it. A machine is not a collection of parts. This is the crucial and easily missed thing. A machine is a system of parts coordinated toward an output, and the coordination is the essence of it, not the parts. The output of a machine is not the sum of what the parts would produce separately. It is what they produce together, and the together, the integration, the way each part is arranged so that it amplifies and enables the others, is an emergent property that exists at the level of the system and not at the level of any part. Take an engine apart and lay the components on a table, and you have all the parts and none of the machine, because the machine was never in the parts. It was in their arrangement, their coordination, the way they work together to produce an output that no part produces alone. And this means something profound for how you can and cannot understand a machine. You cannot see the machine by examining the parts one at a time, however carefully, because the machine is precisely the thing that is not in any part, the coordination, and coordination is invisible to a part-by-part view. To see the machine, you have to see the parts working together in their arrangement, producing the emergent output, and this is a fundamentally different kind of seeing than the examination of components. The principles that determine how to see systems rather than parts, how to perceive the coordination and the emergent output that decomposition misses, are worth studying deliberately and as a connected whole, and there is a body of work that lays them out carefully, called the Naval Codex. It is not a forecast, and it is not a set of tactics. It is a systematic account of the underlying principles that determine who perceives integrated reality accurately, who sees the machine rather than the pile of parts, rather than assessing components in isolation and missing the coordination that makes the whole. If you want to engage with those principles directly, it is linked in the description, and there is a code on the screen you can scan to reach it. And engaging with the principles directly is what matters, because the skill of seeing systems generalizes far beyond any single one, and the systems it applies to will always be different. Now, let me develop the central point, the systematic error of decomposition, because it is the mechanism by which we underestimated everything, and it is a genuine and general truth about the limits of analysis. Analysis, the dominant mode of rigorous thinking, proceeds by decomposition, by breaking a thing into parts and assessing each part carefully. And this is enormously powerful, and it is the right method for a great many purposes, and I am not disparaging it. But it has a systematic blind spot, and the blind spot is precisely the emergent system properties, the things that exist only at the level of the whole, only in the coordination, and that are therefore invisible to a method that examines the parts in isolation. When you decompose an integrated system into its parts and assess each part, you systematically miss the coordination. And so you systematically underestimate the whole, because the whole exceeds the sum by exactly the amount that the coordination contributes, and the coordination is exactly what the decomposition cannot see. And here is the genuinely uncomfortable part, the part that explains why the most rigorous analysts underestimate most. The more rigorously you analyze the parts, the more confident you become in your assessment, and the more complete it feels, because you have examined every component carefully, and this confidence, this sense of completeness, is precisely what blinds you to the machine, because you feel you have understood the thing by understanding its parts, when the machine was never in the parts at all. This is why we underestimated everything. Not because our assessments of the manufacturing, the energy, the technology, the infrastructure were wrong, but because our method, decomposition, was structurally blind to the coordination that turned those parts into a machine, and the more carefully we assessed each part, the more confidently we underestimated the whole. Let me be specific about the machine I actually saw, because the abstraction needs the concrete case. What I saw in China was not a large manufacturing base, and separately serious artificial intelligence development, and separately enormous energy investment, 3 impressive parts to be assessed one at a time. What I saw was these operating together, coordinated, each amplifying the others, and the coordination was the machine. The manufacturing generating the scale and the data that the artificial intelligence learns from, the artificial intelligence accelerating the manufacturing, compressing its cycles, improving its processes, the cheap and abundant energy lowering the cost of both the manufacturing and the computation so that the whole system runs cheaper than any part could alone, and the physical infrastructure enabling the coordination, moving the inputs and outputs at speed. This is an integrated system, a machine, whose output is far greater than the sum of the manufacturing and the energy and the technology assessed separately, and the greatness of the output lives in the coordination, in the way the parts amplify each other, which is exactly the emergent property that a Western analysis assessing the manufacturing base and the energy investment and the technology sector, each in isolation, as most analysis does, systematically underestimated. We had all the parts, we assessed each of them, many of us, carefully, and we underestimated everything because the machine was in the coordination and our decomposition could not see it. And I want to develop why the machine is so hard to see, why decomposition is the default even for the best analysts, because it is not a failure of intelligence, and understanding the reason is the defense against it. We default to decomposition because it is how analysis works, how rigorous thinking is structured, and because expertise itself is organized by part. There is the manufacturing expert who sees the manufacturing deeply and in isolation. There is the energy expert who sees the energy. There's the technology expert who sees the technology. And each of them sees their part with genuine depth, and none of them, by the nature of their specialization, sees the coordination, the way the parts combine into a machine, because the coordination is nobody's part, it exists between the parts at the level of the system in the domain that no specialist owns. And the coordination is genuinely harder to perceive than the parts because it is abstract, emergent, not located in any component you can point to and examine, so that even an analyst who suspects there is a machine struggles to see it because there is no part to examine that contains it. This is why the systematic underestimation of integrated systems afflicts the most rigorous analysts most, because they are the deepest in their part, the most confident in their component assessment, and the least positioned by their very depth to see the coordination that lives between the parts and constitutes the machine. Let me connect this to the dimension that bears most directly on how you are positioned, which is the monetary one. Because the monetary shift too is a system property, a machine, and a decompositional analysis underestimates it in exactly the same way. The pressure on the monetary order is not the fiscal trajectory alone, assessed in isolation, and it is not the reduction of dollar dependence alone, and it is not the diversification of reserves alone. It is the coordination of these forces into a self-reinforcing system, each amplifying the others, the fiscal pressure motivating the monetary accommodation that erodes the currency, that motivates the diversification, that reduces the demand, that worsens the fiscal pressure. A machine of interacting forces whose output, the erosion of the privilege, is greater than the sum of the parts assessed separately. And a decompositional analysis that assesses the fiscal trajectory in isolation and the de-dollarization in isolation and the reserve diversification in isolation systematically underestimates the monetary shift. Because the shift is the coordination, the machine, and the coordination is exactly what the isolated assessments miss. The way capital actually moves as the monetary machine runs, the coordinated system of forces rather than any isolated part, where it flows and why, and what happens to those who assessed the parts separately versus those who saw the machine, is worth understanding in its specific mechanics rather than in vague outline. And there is a framework that traces exactly this, called the dragon pivot. Despite the name, it is not really about any single country. It is about how the monetary order shifts as a coordinated system rather than a collection of separate pressures, and how those who saw the machine positioned themselves before its output became undeniable. You can reach it through the code shown on the screen or through the link in the description for anyone who wants the fuller picture. And that picture matters here precisely because the monetary shift is a machine, a coordination of forces, and seeing it requires exactly the system's perception that decomposition lacks. This brings me to what you actually do, which is to learn to think in systems, to assess machines rather than parts in isolation, and to position based on the integrated reality. Because the practical lesson is not to conclude that China's machine is unstoppable, which would be the alarmist error, and it is not to conclude that our assessments were adequate, which would be the dismissive error. The practical lesson is to correct the analytical bias, to learn to see the coordination and the emergent output that decomposition misses, and to position based on the machine rather than the pile of parts. And in positioning, this means holding a position grounded in the integrated reality of where genuine productive capability actually is, as a coordinated system, rather than in the decomposed assessment that underestimates it, which means owning genuine productive capability positioned for the machine as it actually operates, rather than the fragile claims that a part-by-part analysis missing the coordination would leave you holding. The work of building a position grounded in the integrated reality of the productive system, seen as a machine rather than a collection of parts, is worth doing systematically, and there is a framework devoted precisely to that, called the Sovereign Vault. It is concerned with building durable, generationally significant wealth grounded in real productive assets and real institutional protection, the kind of position that follows from seeing the machine rather than the pile of parts, rather than in the fragile arrangements that a decompositional view mistakes for safety. It is linked below, and the code on the screen will take you straight to it for anyone who wants to go deeper on the question of how to position for the integrated reality rather than the decomposed one. And that is the practical core of it, because seeing the machine means little if you continue to position based on the parts assessed in isolation. Now I want to spend real time on the even-handedness, because it is where the honesty of the reflection is tested, and because the machine metaphor makes it especially necessary in two ways. First, a machine is powerful but not invincible, and this is crucial. A machine has failure modes, dependencies, points where the coordination can break, and the very integration that makes it powerful can also be a fragility, because a highly coordinated system can fail in ways that a loose collection of independent parts cannot. A disruption to one part propagating through the coordination to the whole. And China's machine carries genuine vulnerabilities, real and serious ones, the difficulties in its property sector, the demographic pressures, the genuine questions about the sustainability of aspects of its model. And these are not trivial, and they mean that the machine, impressive as it is not the unstoppable juggernaut of the alarmist reading. And second, and this is the more important point, the West is also a machine. This is essential to the honesty of the whole thing. The West's innovation ecosystem is itself an emergent system property, a coordination, a machine. The research universities and the capital markets and the concentration of talent and the culture of iteration and risk working together to produce breakthroughs that no part produces alone. And this machine is genuine and formidable and durable, especially at the frontier of the most transformative technology. So this is not China's machine against the West's pile of parts. Both are machines, both are coordinated systems, and the West's machine has real and enduring strengths. The point is not that China's machine wins. The point is that we must learn to assess machines, systems, coordination on all sides, rather than assessing parts in isolation, because the systematic underestimation of integrated systems is an error that applies to how we assess everything, including our own strengths, which a decompositional view also underestimates. And this is the generalizable lesson, the deepest takeaway, and I want to state it clearly because it is the thing worth carrying far beyond this one case. The systematic underestimation of integrated systems by decompositional analysis is a general error, not specific to China, and it afflicts how we assess everything, competitors and technologies and economies and our own positions. We assess parts in isolation because that is how analysis works and how expertise is organized, and we systematically miss the coordination that turns parts into machines. And so we systematically underestimate integrated systems while feeling, because we assessed every part, that our understanding is complete. And the correction is to learn to see systems, to perceive the coordination and the emergence and the way parts combine, rather than assessing components in isolation. For the individual and the investor, this has a sharp edge, because the biggest opportunities and the biggest risks live at the system level in the coordination that decomposition misses, so that those who learn to see machines, to perceive the integrated whole rather than the pile of parts, gain an edge over those whose rigorous part analysis leaves them systematically underestimating the systems that actually shape the world. I want to think honestly about why we default to parts and underestimate systems, why the error persists even after it is named, because understanding the mechanism is the only defense against it. The first reason is the sheer ease of decomposition, that breaking a thing into parts and assessing each is tractable, doable, teachable, while seeing the coordination is hard and abstract and not reducible to a procedure. The second reason is the organization of expertise by part, that our knowledge is structured into specializations, each of which sees its component deeply and none of which owns the coordination, so that the machine is nobody's expertise and falls between all the specializations. The third reason is the abstractness of coordination, that the parts are concrete and examinable, while the coordination is emergent and not located in any component, so that there is nothing to point at and examine, and the mind, which grasps the concrete more easily than the abstract, reaches for the parts and misses the arrangement. And the fourth reason, the deepest, is the false confidence that rigorous part analysis provides, the sense of completeness that comes from having examined every component, which is precisely the confidence that blinds you to the machine, because it persuades you that you have understood the thing by understanding its parts when the machine was never in the parts. These reasons together explain why we keep underestimating systems even after being told, because the ease and the expertise structure and the abstractness and the false confidence all push toward the parts and away from the coordination, and the machine goes unseen. I want to be very clear one final time about what I am not saying, because the misreadings here are dangerous and I want to foreclose them. We underestimated everything is not a claim that China is an unstoppable machine and the West is doomed, because a machine has vulnerabilities and China's are real and the West is itself a formidable machine. And doom is not the conclusion. And it is not China triumphalism, because the lesson is about assessing systems on all sides, including our own strengths, that decomposition also underestimates. And inside the machine is not a claim of Chinese omnipotence. It is a metaphor for a coordinated system, and coordinated systems are powerful but not invincible. And it is not essentialism, not a claim about any people. It is a claim about an analytical error, the underestimation of integrated systems by the decomposition of them into parts. And it is not doom or panic, because the appropriate response to an analytical error is not fear, but the correction of the analysis, the learning to see machines, which is a calm and improving act, not an alarmed one. So I want to end, as I always do, not with an exhortation, but with an invitation to see clearly, because this is, in the end, one of the oldest truths there is about understanding, and it is not new. The whole exceeds the sum, and the coordination is invisible to a part-by-part view, and you cannot understand a machine by taking it apart and examining the pieces, because the machine was never in the pieces, it was in their arrangement. We underestimate integrated systems by assessing their parts in isolation, and the more rigorously we assess the parts, the more confidently we underestimate the whole. This is not new. What is new is only the specific circumstance. A particular integrated system, a machine of coordinated manufacturing and energy and technology, that a decompositional analysis assessed part by part and thereby underestimated, and a particular monetary shift that is itself a machine, a coordination of forces that the isolated assessments miss, and the particular cost of positioning based on the parts, while the machines on all sides produce their emergent output. We underestimated everything, not because we lacked the parts, but because we never saw the machine. That is the thing I most want to leave you with. And the remedy is not alarm, and it is not triumphalism. It is the learning to see systems, to perceive the coordination and the emergence and the way parts combine into wholes that exceed their sums on all sides, in China's machine and in the West's and in the monetary machine and in your own position. Learn to see the coordination that decomposition misses, assess machines, not piles of parts, and position based on the integrated reality rather than the decomposed assessment that underestimates it. And the value of that system's perception, of seeing the machine while others assess the parts, invisible for a long time the way these things always are, through the stretch in which the decompositional analysis still feels complete, and the person who saw the machine appears merely to be overstating what the careful part assessments already covered, reveals itself the way these things always reveal themselves, which is slowly in the quiet accumulation of decisions grounded in the integrated reality that the part-by-part view underestimated, and then suddenly, at the moment the machine's emergent output becomes undeniable, even to those who assessed only its parts, and the people who learned to see the coordination, who perceived the machine rather than the pile, are found to have been, all along, simply the ones who understood that the whole was always more than the sum.